On a rain-slicked October evening in Stockholm, Erik Lindström touched the wedding ring he'd hidden for 10 years, the one that belonged to the wife everyone said was dead, and wondered if ghosts could feel the cold. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more thrilling stories, turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update, and sit back, relax, and enjoy this captivating tale. On a rain-slicked October evening in Stockholm, Erik Lindström touched the wedding ring he'd hidden for 10 years, the one that belonged to the wife everyone said was dead, and wondered if ghosts could feel the cold. The penthouse overlooked Kungsträdgården, where autumn had turned the trees into skeletal sentries against the darkening sky. Erik stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection a stranger in a Tom Ford suit, his jaw tight with a kind of tension that comes from years of holding one's breath. Below, the city pulsed with life, couples walking arm in arm past the fountains, business people rushing toward warmth, tourists photographing the fading light. None of them knew that in 3 days, he would marry a woman he didn't love. The ring burned against his palm, a small circle of white gold that had survived a decade in the back of his desk drawer, hidden beneath contracts and forgotten business cards. He shouldn't have taken it out. He'd promised himself he wouldn't. But something about the approaching wedding made his hands move of their own accord, reaching for the only piece of Astrid he had left. Astrid. Even thinking her name felt like touching a wound that had never quite healed. The doctors called it complicated grief. His mother called it weakness. Erik called it nothing at all, because naming it would mean acknowledging that 10 years later, he still woke up reaching for someone who wasn't there. The door to his penthouse clicked open with the sharp efficiency his mother brought to everything. Margareta Lindström entered without knocking. She never knocked on doors she'd paid for, her Chanel coat perfectly pressed despite the rain, her silver hair swept into the same severe chignon she'd worn since Erik was a boy. "You're brooding again," she said, her voice carrying the distinct accent of Stockholm's old money, each consonant crisp as breaking ice. Sophia called. "She's concerned you haven't responded to the caterer's questions about the wedding menu." Erik slipped the ring back into his pocket, the movement smooth and practiced. "I'll call her." "When?" Margareta crossed to the bar cart, pouring herself 2 fingers of Mackmyra whiskey without asking if he wanted any. She never asked. "The wedding is Saturday, Erik. 3 days. You cannot keep behaving as though this is some burden being forced upon you." "But isn't it?" The thought came unbidden. Dangerous. He pushed it away. "Sophia is perfect," Margareta continued, settling into the leather armchair that faced the windows, her posture impeccable even at 67. "Beautiful, educated, from an excellent family. The Bergström name will complement our business interests beautifully. You should be grateful she agreed to this marriage after your hesitation." Hesitation. Such a clean word for 10 years of refusing every woman his mother paraded before him. 10 years of saying no until his grief wore thin enough that Sophia's patient smile finally looked like escape instead of betrayal. "I am grateful," Erik said, because it was easier than the truth. His mother's eyes, the same ice blue as his own, narrowed slightly. "You're wearing that expression again. The one you had after." She paused, took a deliberate sip of whiskey. "After the incident." The incident. Another clean word for the night his world ended. Erik turned back to the window, watching his reflection overlap with the city below. "I'm fine, more. You're thinking about her." The air in the penthouse seemed to thin. They never spoke about Astrid. Not after the funeral, empty casket, closed because there was no body to bury, and not in the decade since. His mother had efficiently erased every trace of his first wife from their lives, packing away photos, donating clothes, even removing Astrid's name from the family records at the summer house in Dalarö. "I'm thinking," Erik said carefully, "about the merger with Bergström Industries. About the wedding. About the future." Each word was a stone he laid between himself and the truth. Margareta stood, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her coat. "Good. The past is the past, Erik. Astrid was." She paused, searching for another clean word. "Unsuitable. This marriage to Sophia is what you need. What the company needs. What our family needs." "What you need," Erik thought but didn't say. His mother crossed to the door, then paused, her hand on the crystal doorknob. "There's been talk," she said, her back still to him. "Some gossip about a woman asking questions downtown. About you. About Astrid." She turned then, her expression unreadable. "Security is handling it. Probably another journalist dredging up old stories for some anniversary piece." The 10-year mark always brings them out. Something cold slithered down Eric's spine. What kind of questions? Nothing of consequence. Margarita's smile was thin, practiced. Don't let it distract you. Focus on Saturday. Focus on your future with Sophia. She left, and the penthouse fell into the kind of silence that feels like waiting. Eric pulled the ring from his pocket again, holding it up to the window where the city lights caught in the gold. He remembered buying it at a small jewelry shop in Gamla Stan, remembered Astrid's face when he proposed on the Durgarden ferry, the way she'd laughed and cried simultaneously, the way the Stockholm sunset had turned her blonde hair to fire. Unsuitable. That's what his mother had called her. Too poor, too impulsive, too full of dreams that didn't include board meetings and strategic marriages. Astrid had been a photographer, had wanted to travel, to capture moments instead of accumulate wealth. She'd made Eric laugh. She'd made him feel alive. And then one October night, 10 years ago this very week, she'd driven to Arlanda airport for an assignment and simply disappeared. They'd found her car 3 days later on a remote road near the airport. Doors locked, keys in the ignition, her camera equipment untouched. No signs of struggle. No ransom demand. No body. Just absence, spreading like a stain through Eric's life until even the memory of her smile felt uncertain. The police investigation lasted 6 months before going cold. His mother had insisted on the funeral, had insisted Eric move on. Closure, she'd called it, as though they could bury empty space and call it grief. But Eric had never believed she was dead. Not really. Some part of him, the part that still kept her ring, that still caught himself listening for her footsteps, knew. Knew she was out there somewhere, that their story hadn't ended on that road near Arlanda. He stared at the ring in his palm, at the inscription inside he'd memorized a lifetime ago, Minute Eviga. My eternal. Have you ever felt the presence of someone you lost, even when the world told you they were gone? What would you do if the past came knocking 3 days before you were supposed to marry someone else? His phone buzzed. Sophia. He let it go to voicemail, unable to face her sweet, reasonable voice, her questions about flowers and vows and happily ever afters that felt like lies. Outside, rain began to fall harder, turning the windows into watercolor paintings of the city below. Eric pressed his forehead against the cold glass, the ring still clutched in his fist, and allowed himself one moment, just one, to remember. Astrid, laughing in the summer house garden. Astrid, dancing in their tiny first apartment in Södermalm. Astrid, whispering against his neck in the dark, Minute Eviga. My eternal. The memory was so vivid he could almost smell her perfume, something soft and floral she'd worn, jasmine maybe, or lilac. Then Eric froze. He could smell it. Jasmine. Lilac. Astrid's perfume, faint but unmistakable, drifting through his penthouse like a ghost-made fragrance. His heart stopped, restarted, stopped again. Slowly, as though moving through water, Eric turned from the window. The penthouse was empty. Of course it was empty. He was alone, had been alone, would always be. The elevator chimed. Someone had bypassed security. Someone had the code to his private elevator, a code only he and his mother, and Astrid, 10 years ago, had known. The doors slid open. And Eric's carefully constructed world shattered like Stockholm ice in spring. She stood in the elevator doorway like a question mark made flesh. Astrid. Not a ghost. Not a memory. Astrid. 10 years had carved themselves into her face with a sculptor's cruelty, new lines bracketing her mouth, a scar threading pale across her left temple, disappearing into hair that was no longer the bright blonde he remembered but darker, threaded with premature grey. She was thinner, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut, her clothes hanging on a frame that had forgotten softness. A cheap rain jacket clung to her shoulders, soaked through, and her jeans were worn at the knees, frayed at the hems. But her eyes. God, her eyes were still that impossible green, the color of the Baltic in summer, and they were fixed on him with an intensity that made his lungs forget their purpose. Eric, she whispered, and the sound of his name in her voice, that voice he'd heard in dreams and nightmares for a decade, nearly brought him to his knees. The ring fell from his hand, bouncing once on the hardwood floor, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the suspended moment between them. Neither moved. The elevator doors began to close, and Astrid's hand shot out, catching them, the movement sharp with something like panic. Please, she said. Please don't. I know I shouldn't be here. I know it's been. I know. Eric's mouth opened. Closed. His brain was trying to process impossible information. Dead wife, alive, standing in elevator, real, breathing, here. The thoughts came in fragments, refusing to form coherent sentences. "You're dead," he heard himself say, and winced at the absurdity of the words even as they left his mouth. Something that might have been a smile, broken, bitter, flickered across Astrid's face. "I know what they told you. What everyone thinks. But I'm not. Her voice cracked, and she pressed her lips together hard, as though physically holding back words. "I'm here. I'm real. I know it's impossible, but... how?" The word came out harsh, almost angry. Eric's hands had curled into fists at his sides, his body trying to contain the earthquake happening inside his chest. "How are you here? Where have you been?" Astrid stepped out of the elevator, and he saw her legs were shaking. She moved like someone who'd forgotten how to inhabit space, her shoulders hunched as though expecting a blow. When she was 3 feet away, she stopped, and Eric could see the way her throat worked as she swallowed. "I didn't want to come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told myself I wouldn't. That you'd moved on, that I had no right, that too much time had passed." Her eyes, those impossible green eyes, shimmered with unshed tears. "But then I heard you were getting married." The words hit him like a fist to the sternum. "Saturday," Astrid continued, and now the tears did fall, tracking silent down her too thin face. "This Saturday. 3 days from now. To someone named Sofia Bergström. I saw the announcement in Svenska Dagbladet. There was a photo of you together at some charity gala. You were smiling." She said it like an accusation, and maybe it was. Eric's mind was racing, tripping over itself. Questions piled up in his throat, each one desperate to escape first. "Where were you? Why didn't you come back? Did you leave me on purpose? Are you real? Am I losing my mind? Do you know what your disappearance did to me?" What came out was, "You've been in Sweden. All this time." "No." Astrid wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture that made her look impossibly small. "No, I came back 2 weeks ago. I've been trying to find the courage to..." She broke off, looked away toward the windows where rain streaked the glass like tears. "I had no right to come here. You have a new life. A fiancé. Your mother probably..." "Don't," Eric said sharply, and Astrid flinched. He forced himself to breathe, to gentle his tone. "Don't talk about what I have. You have no idea what I have." Silence stretched between them, filled only with the sound of rain and the distant hum of the city below. Eric's hands were shaking now, a fine tremor he couldn't control. He wanted to close the distance between them, to touch her, to prove she was real. He wanted to scream. He wanted to collapse. He wanted to demand answers, and he wanted to pretend this wasn't happening, and he wanted... God, he wanted her. The realization hit him with devastating clarity. 10 years, and the sight of her still unmade him completely. "I need to know," Eric said, his voice rough as gravel. "I need to know where you were. What happened that night? Why you never..." He couldn't finish. "Why you never came back to me." Astrid's face crumpled, and she pressed a hand to her mouth as though holding back a sob. "It's not a simple story." "Then tell me the complicated version." Eric took one step toward her, then another, drawn by gravity he'd thought dead. "Astrid, they found your car. Your keys. Everything. The police thought..." His voice broke. "I thought you were dead. I mourned you. I buried an empty casket with your name on it. I know." The words came out choked. "Eric, I know. And I'm so sorry. I'm so..." She swayed slightly, and Eric saw what he'd missed in his shock. She wasn't just thin, she was exhausted, her skin pale as Stockholm snow, dark circles like bruises under her eyes. "When did you last eat?" he asked, the question automatic, protective instincts overriding everything else. Astrid blinked, clearly not expecting the question. Yesterday? I don't." "Sit down before you fall down." Eric gestured to the couch, then moved to the kitchen, needing distance, needing something to do with his hands that wasn't reaching for her. He pulled bread from the cupboard, cheese from the refrigerator, his movements mechanical while his mind screamed. Behind him, he heard Astrid move slowly to the couch, the leather sighing as she sat. "You kept it," she said, her voice thick with something he couldn't name. "The couch. We bought it together. At that store in Hammarby Sjöstad. Remember? You said it was too expensive, and I said, nothing is too expensive if it means coming home to you. Eric finished the sentence without turning, his hand still on the cutting board. I remember. He'd almost gotten rid of it 100 times. His mother had certainly tried. But every time he'd considered it, something in him had refused. Now he understood why. Eric arranged the food on a plate, simple, quick, something to ground them both, and carried it to the coffee table. When he finally looked at Astrid properly, sitting on their couch in his penthouse, wet and scared and impossibly alive, his composure nearly shattered. Eat, he said, sitting in the armchair across from her, maintaining distance because if he sat next to her, if he was within touching distance, he didn't trust what he might do. Then talk. Astrid picked up a piece of bread with trembling hands, took a small bite, then another. She ate like someone who'd forgotten how, each movement careful and deliberate. Eric watched, cataloguing every change in her, the scar on her temple, the way her left hand shook more than her right, the way she kept glancing at the door as though expecting someone to burst through. You're afraid, he said quietly. Astrid's eyes snapped to his, and he saw the answer there before she spoke. Yes. Of what? She set down the bread, her appetite clearly gone. Eric, what happened to me? It wasn't an accident. I didn't just disappear. She took a shuddering breath, and Eric saw her gathering courage like armor. I was taken. The words hung in the air between them, terrible and stark. Taken, Eric repeated, his voice hollow. You mean? Kidnapped. The word came out flat, factual, as though she'd practiced saying it without emotion. That night. I was driving to the airport, and there was a car behind me, following too close. I thought it was just aggressive driving at first, but then they forced me off the road. 2 men. They. She closed her eyes. I don't want to give you details you don't need. But yes. I was taken. Eric's world tilted. He gripped the arms of the chair, knuckles white. Who? Why? I don't know who. Not really. I never saw their faces clearly, they wore masks. As for why? Astrid's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I think it was random. Wrong place, wrong time. They wanted money at first, but then. She trailed off, and Eric saw shadows move behind her eyes, memories she wouldn't share. Astrid's hands trembled as 10 years of nightmare pressed against her lips, and Eric realized some stories break you just in the telling. If someone you loved returned after a decade of horror, would you want to know every detail, or would some truths be too heavy to carry together? How did you escape? Eric asked, his voice barely functional. I didn't. Not for years. Astrid's laugh was bitter, empty. I tried. God, I tried so many times. But they moved me, kept me isolated. Eventually they took me out of Sweden entirely. It wasn't until 6 months ago that I finally. She met his eyes, and he saw steel beneath the fragility. I got lucky. One of them made a mistake, left a door unlocked. I ran. 6 months ago, Eric repeated slowly. You've been free for 6 months, and you're only now. I was in Germany when I escaped. No money, no passport. No, I wasn't myself, Eric. I needed time. Treatment. I spent 4 months in a facility in Berlin, trying to remember how to be human again. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. And even after, I was terrified to come back. Terrified they'd find me again. Terrified that you'd. Her voice broke. That you'd hate me for leaving you. I could never hate you, Eric said, the words ripped from somewhere deep and raw. Astrid, you didn't leave me. You were taken. But I didn't come back sooner. I could have found a way to contact you years ago, maybe, if I'd been braver, if I'd. Stop. Eric stood abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. He paced to the window, pressed his palms against the cold glass, tried to organize the chaos in his head. Behind him, he heard Astrid's quiet breathing, the rustle of her rain jacket. His wife, because yes, legally, impossibly, she was still his wife, had been held captive for a decade. Had suffered things he couldn't imagine. Had escaped and spent months recovering and then had come back to find him engaged to another woman. Sophia, Astrid said quietly, as though reading his thoughts. Tell me about her. Eric's jaw clenched. There's nothing to tell. You're marrying her in 3 days. Yes. Do you love her? The question landed like a blade between his ribs. Eric turned from the window to find Astrid watching him with those green eyes that had always seen too much, understood too clearly. No, he said, because lies had no place here, not anymore. I don't. Something flickered across Astrid's face. Relief? Pain? Both? Then why? Because I was tired. The confession came out harsh, angry, but not at her. At himself. At the years. At everything. Tired of being alone. Tired of my mother's pressure. Tired of hoping for something impossible. Sophia is kind. She's patient. She doesn't ask me to feel things I can't feel. He laughed. Bitter. My mother chose her. I just agreed. You were going to marry someone you don't love. Astrid stood slowly, and Eric saw the way she swayed, exhausted and overwhelmed. Eric, that's not. What was I supposed to do? He heard his voice rising, couldn't stop it. Wait forever? Mourn forever? Astrid, you were gone. Everyone said you were dead. The police closed the case. Your parents held a funeral. My mother insisted I move on. And I tried, God, I tried, but every woman I met was just, not you. Silence fell, heavy and charged. I still have your ring, Eric said quietly. He bent down, retrieved it from where it had fallen on the floor, held it up so she could see. I've kept it all these years. In my desk drawer. I take it out sometimes when He stopped, unable to finish. Astrid's eyes filled with fresh tears. Minute Eviga, she whispered, reading the inscription from memory. My eternal, Eric translated unnecessarily. They both knew what it meant. They'd chosen the words together, young and in love and convinced forever was a promise they could keep. I don't know what happens now, Astrid said, her voice small and lost. I didn't think past finding you. Telling you I was alive. I couldn't let you marry someone else without knowing. Without you knowing that she pressed a hand to her chest, over her heart. That I never stopped. Even when everything else was taken from me, even when I thought I'd die in that place, I never stopped loving you. The words broke something in Eric. Or maybe they repaired it. He couldn't tell. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, and then he was standing directly in front of her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough to smell the rain in her hair and that faint trace of jasmine perfume. I need time, he said, his voice rough. I need to think. This is, Astrid, this is impossible. She nodded, stepping back, putting distance between them even though it clearly cost her. I understand. I shouldn't have come. Don't. Eric caught her arm gently, felt her go still beneath his touch. Don't run. Not again. Please. He released her immediately, but held her gaze. Where are you staying? A hostel. In Sodermalm. Eric's jaw tightened. His wife, and she was his wife, regardless of what the calendar said, was staying in a hostel while he lived in a penthouse. No. You'll stay at the summer house. In Delaro. It's empty this time of year. You'll be safe there, Anne. Eric, I can't accept. You can. You will. He moved to his desk, pulled out keys, pressed them into her hand. Take my car. The Volvo in the garage. It's safer than whatever you've been using. The address is still the same. I'll have the housekeeper stock the kitchen tomorrow. Astrid stared at the keys in her palm as though they were holy relics. Why are you being kind to me? The question stabbed him. Because you're my wife, he said simply. Because you suffered something unimaginable. Because, he stopped, overwhelmed. Because seeing you alive is the first real thing I've felt in 10 years. A tear slid down Astrid's cheek, and she didn't wipe it away. The wedding, she said. What will you do about? I don't know. Eric ran a hand through his hair, suddenly exhausted. I need to think. I need to talk to Sophia. To my mother. I need to. He looked at Astrid, really looked at her, and saw his past and his future colliding in one impossible moment. I need time. Okay. Astrid closed her fingers around the keys. Okay. I'll go to Delaro. I'll wait. however long you need. She moved toward the elevator, and Eric felt panic flare in his chest, irrational, visceral. Astrid. She turned back. Promise me, he said. Promise me you won't disappear again. Her smile was sad, broken, beautiful. I promise. No more disappearing. I'm here. For as long as you'll let me be. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside. Their eyes held until the doors closed between them, and then she was gone, leaving Eric standing in his penthouse surrounded by the ghost of jasmine perfume and the impossible truth that his dead wife was alive. He sank onto the couch, their couch, and pressed his face into his hands. In 3 days, he was supposed to marry Sophia. But his heart had just walked back into his life, broken and scarred and more real than anything he'd felt in a decade. Eric looked down at his hand, where the ring still rested against his palm. Minute eviga. Outside, the Stockholm rain fell harder, and somewhere in the city, his carefully constructed life began to crumble like sand. Before we continue, don't forget to smash that like button if you're enjoying what you're seeing. Your support means the world to me and helps this channel grow. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our uploads. We're building an amazing community here, and I don't want you to miss out on what's coming. And please, share this video with your friends, family, or anyone who would love this type of content. The more people we can bring into this community, the better it gets for everyone. Your engagement in the comments has been incredible, and I love reading every single one of your thoughts and theories. Keep them coming. Now, let's go in depth into the story. Eric didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark of his penthouse, watching the city lights blur through Rain Street windows, his phone clutched in one hand and Astrid's ring in the other. Sophia had called 4 times. His mother, twice. He'd answered neither, letting their voices pile up in his voicemail like accusations he wasn't ready to face. How did you tell your fiancé that your dead wife had returned from the grave? How did you explain to anyone that the impossible had walked through your door and shattered a decade of careful numbness in less than an hour? By dawn, Eric had made one decision. He would go to Delaro. See Astrid again in daylight, when his mind was clearer and shock had faded enough to let logic function. He needed to understand what had happened to her, really understand, and he needed to look into her eyes without the ghost of 10 years between them. But first, he had to face his mother. Margareta Lindstrom's office occupied the top floor of the Lindstrom Industries building on Strandvägen, with windows overlooking the harbor where million-krona yachts bobbed like expensive toys. She sat behind a desk of Swedish oak, her posture impeccable even at 7 in the morning, reviewing contracts with the focused intensity of a surgeon. She didn't look up when Eric entered. "You missed the final venue walkthrough yesterday evening," she said, signing a document with sharp, precise strokes. Sophia was disappointed. "More, we need to talk." "We are talking." Margareta set down her pen, finally meeting his eyes. "Though I suspect this conversation is not about centerpieces or seating charts." Eric closed the office door behind him, a gesture that made his mother's eyebrows rise infinitesimally. They rarely closed doors. The Lindstrom family conducted their lives with the transparency of those who had nothing to hide and everything to control. "Something happened last night," Eric said, remaining standing because sitting felt like surrender. "Something impossible." Margareta's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Wariness, perhaps, or foreknowledge. "Go on." "Astrid is alive." The words dropped into the office like stones into still water. Eric watched his mother's face, waiting for shock, disbelief, anything that resembled a normal human reaction to impossible news. Instead, Margareta reached for her coffee, took a measured sip, and said, "I see." "You see." Eric's voice rose despite his attempt at control. "That's all you have to say? I see." "What would you have me say, Eric? That I'm shocked? Astounded?" Margareta set down her cup with deliberate care. "I told you yesterday there was a woman asking questions. Did you think I hadn't already confirmed her identity?" The floor seemed to tilt beneath Eric's feet. "You knew. You knew Astrid was alive, and you didn't tell me." "I knew a woman claiming to be Astrid was asking questions about you downtown. I knew she'd been spotted near the office building, near your penthouse." Margareta's voice remained level, clinical. "I had security investigate. Yes, the woman appears to be your former wife. But Eric, you must understand." Former wife. Eric's hands clenched into fists. She's my wife. Legally, actually, impossibly, she's my wife. She abandoned you 10 years ago. She was kidnapped. The words exploded out of him, echoing off the office walls. Held captive. For years. She escaped 6 months ago. This wasn't abandonment, it was, he broke off, breathing hard. How long have you known? Margarita stood, moving to the windows with the controlled grace that had always made her seem more statue than woman. 3 days. Security identified her 3 days ago. 3 days. His mother had known for 3 days that Astrid was alive and had said nothing. Had continued planning his wedding, adjusting seating charts, confirming caterers, all while knowing his wife, his actual wife, was somewhere in Stockholm. You were going to let me marry Sophia, Eric said slowly, understanding crystallizing like ice in his chest. You were going to let me commit bigamy. Don't be dramatic. I was handling the situation. Margarita turned from the window, and for the first time, Eric saw something like frustration crack her composed facade. Eric, think logically. A woman disappears for 10 years, presumed dead, legally declared deceased, and suddenly reappears 3 days before your wedding? Doesn't that strike you as suspicious? Suspicious, Eric repeated flatly. What does she want? Money? A settlement? To disrupt your life out of spite? Margarita crossed her arms, and Eric recognized the stance. It was her boardroom posture, the one she used when preparing for hostile negotiations. This woman, whether she is truly Astrid or some elaborate fraud, has impeccable timing. Almost theatrical timing. She's not after money, Eric said, his voice dangerously quiet. She's traumatized. Scared. She's been through hell, and she came back to. To what? Reclaim you? Disrupt your marriage? Margarita's laugh was sharp, brittle. Eric, I loved your father, God rest him, but I learned long ago that love is not enough to build a life. You need stability. Partnership. Someone from the right background who understands our world. Sophia is that person. This. Astrid, she was unsuitable 10 years ago, and she's even more so now. The word, unsuitable, hit Eric like a slap. He'd heard his mother use it before, had absorbed it into his understanding of why his marriage to Astrid had always been contentious. But hearing it now, after learning what Astrid had endured, made something dark and furious uncurl in his chest. Get out, he said quietly. Margarita blinked. Excuse me. Get out of my office. This building belongs to Lindstrom Industries, which means it belongs to me. You are the chairman, but I am the CEO. And I am telling you to leave. For a long moment, mother and son stared at each other across the expanse of expensive carpet. Then Margarita picked up her handbag, Hermes, naturally, and moved toward the door with measured steps. At the threshold, she paused. The wedding is in 2 days, Eric. If you cancel now, the scandal will destroy our reputation. The Bergstrom family will pull out of the merger. Everything we've built will be jeopardized. And for what? A woman who's been gone for a decade. For my wife, Eric said. For the truth. Margarita's smile was cold as Stockholm in January. Then I hope your truth is worth the price you'll pay. She left, and Eric sank into his desk chair, his hands shaking with rage and something that felt disturbingly like liberation. The drive to Dalaro took 40 minutes through morning traffic and October rain. Eric drove his backup car, the Volvo was with Astrid, at the summer house, and used the time to rehearse conversations in his head. What would he say? What did he even want from this? The summer house appeared through the trees like a memory made solid. Red paint faded to soft crimson, white trim bright against the surrounding forest, the Baltic Sea visible through the pines. Eric's grandfather had built it in the 1950s, a place for the family to escape Stockholm's summer heat. Eric and Astrid had spent their first married summer here, before his mother's disapproval and business demands had pulled them back to the city. The Volvo sat in the gravel driveway, rain-speckled and solid. Real. Eric parked beside it and sat for a moment, gathering courage. Through the living room window, he could see movement, Astrid, pacing, alive. He found her in the kitchen, standing at the sink with a mug of coffee clutched in both hands, staring out at the grey-shrouded sea. She'd changed into dry clothes, jeans and a thick wool sweater she must have found in the closet, one of the guest sweaters kept for unexpected visitors. Her hair was damp from a shower, darker than he remembered, falling past her shoulders. She turned when she heard the door, and Eric saw she'd been crying. "I didn't think you'd come so soon," she said, her voice rough from tears or exhaustion or both. "I needed to see you. To make sure last night was real." Eric stayed in the doorway, maintaining distance because closeness felt dangerous. "Did you sleep?" "No." "You?" "No." They stood in the kitchen where they'd once cooked breakfast together, laughing and burning toast, and the weight of 10 years pressed down like gravity. "My mother knew," Eric said. "She's known for 3 days that you were alive. She didn't tell me." Astrid's face went pale. "Of course she knew. She probably had people following me the moment I arrived in Stockholm." She set down her mug with trembling hands. "She never wanted me in your life, Eric. Even before I disappeared, she was looking for ways to—" She stopped, shook her head. "It doesn't matter now." "It does matter. Everything matters." Eric moved into the kitchen, pulled out a chair at the small wooden table. "Sit down. Please. I need you to tell me everything. From the beginning." Astrid sat slowly, and Eric took the chair across from her, close enough to see the scar on her temple, the shadows under her eyes, the way her left hand trembled slightly when she laid it on the table. As Astrid prepared to unlock 10 years of horror, Eric realized that some truths change you forever, and he would carry her story like scars on his own skin. How do you hold space for someone else's trauma without trying to fix what can't be fixed? Is love enough when the past is this heavy? "That night," Astrid began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I was driving to Arlanda for an assignment. A German magazine wanted photos of the midnight sun phenomenon for their summer issue. I was excited. It was good money, a chance to travel. You were working late. Remember? You kissed me goodbye at the apartment, said you'd see me in a week." Eric remembered. He'd been reviewing contracts for a merger that fell through 6 months later. He'd barely looked up when she left, had muttered something about being careful. It was the last time he'd seen her for 10 years. "There was a car behind me," Astrid continued. "Dark sedan. It followed too close, aggressive. I thought it was just Stockholm traffic, someone in a hurry. But when I took the exit toward the airport, it followed. When I sped up, it sped up. When I tried to change lanes, it blocked me." Her hands were clasped together now, knuckles white with tension. Eric wanted to reach across the table, to touch her, but something in her posture told him she needed space to tell this. "They forced me off the road. Not violently, more like herding. Professional. The moment I stopped, they were there. 2 men, both masked. One opened my door, the other grabbed my phone, my camera, everything. I tried to fight, tried to scream, but we were on a remote access road. No one to hear." Her voice cracked. "They injected me with something. I woke up, somewhere else." "Where?" Eric's voice was hoarse. "A room. Concrete. No windows. There was a mattress, a bucket, a bottle of water. That's all. For the first few days, I thought they'd killed me. That I was in some kind of purgatory." She laughed, bitter and broken. "I wish I had been dead. It would have been easier." Eric's chest felt like it was caving in. "Did they?" He couldn't finish the question. Astrid met his eyes, and he saw the answer there, raw and terrible. "Not in the way you're thinking. But there are many ways to violate a person, Eric. Many ways to break someone down until they forget they were ever whole." Silence fell, heavy with horror. "They kept me isolated for months," Astrid continued, her voice mechanical now, reciting facts to distance herself from emotion. "I never saw their faces. They fed me irregularly, sometimes once a day, sometimes once every few days. The room was always dark except when they brought food. I lost track of time. Days? Weeks? I couldn't tell." "Why?" Eric's voice broke on the word. "What did they want?" "At first, I thought ransom. They asked questions about you, about your family's money. But they never made contact, never sent demands. Eventually, I realized they were just keeping me, like I was inventory." She pressed a hand to her mouth, breathing hard. "After about a year, I think it was a year, they moved me. Drugged me again. Transported me. When I woke up, I was in a different place. Still a room, still isolated, but different sounds outside. Different language. I realized I wasn't in Sweden anymore. Where? Eric demanded, his voice sharp with helpless rage. I don't know. Eastern Europe. Maybe? Germany? I heard Russian sometimes, German. Languages I didn't understand. They moved me 3 more times over the years. Always the same routine. Drug me, transport me, lock me in a new room. Her eyes were distant now, lost in memory. I tried to escape so many times. Screamed until my voice gave out. Fought when they brought food. Tried to hurt myself badly enough that they'd have to take me to a hospital. Astrid, Eric's voice cracked. None of it worked. They were professionals, Eric. This wasn't amateur hour. They knew how to keep people. She took a shuddering breath. Eventually, I stopped fighting. Just existed. Counted days by meals. Created routines to stay sane. Told myself stories. Remembered our life together, every detail I could hold on to. That's what kept me alive. Remembering you. A tear slid down Eric's cheek, and he didn't bother wiping it away. How did you escape? 6 months ago, they moved me again. But this time, whoever was in charge got sloppy. Or maybe they thought I was broken enough not to run. The room had a window, small, barred, but I could see outside for the first time in years. And one day, when they brought food, someone forgot to lock the door properly. She smiled then, and it was the saddest thing Eric had ever seen. I waited until night. Forced the door open. There was a hallway, stairs, another door. I kept expecting someone to grab me, to drag me back. But I made it outside. I was in a warehouse district somewhere. I still don't know where exactly. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, hid in alleys, stole clothes from a laundry line, walked for days. Days. Eric whispered. I was terrified they'd find me. Catch me. Bring me back. I avoided main roads, big cities. Eventually, I stumbled into a small town in what I later learned was Eastern Germany. A church. The priest there, he helped me. Called social services. I was taken to a hospital, then a facility for trauma victims. Her voice softened. They saved my life. Gave me therapy, medicine, helped me remember how to be human. And when I was finally stable enough, I told them I needed to go home. To Stockholm. To find out if you were still. She trailed off, but Eric understood. To find out if you still existed. If you'd moved on. If there was anything left to come back to. I searched for you online, Astrid said quietly. That's when I saw the engagement announcement. You and Sofia Bergström, looking perfect together at that charity gala. The article said you were marrying this Saturday. Stockholm's most eligible bachelor finally settles down, they called you. She wiped at her eyes. I should have stayed away. Let you have your happiness. But I couldn't. I couldn't let you marry someone else without you knowing I was alive. Without you knowing that I never stopped. Her voice broke. That I never stopped loving you. Eric stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. He couldn't sit still anymore, couldn't contain the storm of emotions tearing through him. He paced to the window, pressed his forehead against the cold glass, tried to breathe through the rage and grief and love that threatened to drown him. I have to tell Sofia, he said finally. I have to cancel the wedding. Behind him, Astrid made a small, wounded sound. Eric. No. I didn't come here to destroy your life. If you love her. I don't love her. Eric turned from the window, and the raw honesty in his voice made Astrid go still. I was going to marry her anyway, because I was tired of being alone. Tired of grieving. Tired of hoping for something impossible. But I don't love her. I never loved her. Then who do you love? Astrid asked, her voice barely audible. Eric crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. They were cold, trembling, real. You, he said fiercely. God help me, after everything, after 10 years, after telling myself I needed to move on, it's still you. It's always been you. Astrid's face crumpled, and she pulled her hands free to cover her face as sobs shook her thin shoulders. Eric gathered her into his arms, and she clung to him like someone drowning, crying into his shoulder while he held her and whispered wordless comfort in Swedish, the language of their shared past. Minute Allskulling, he murmured. My love. I'm here. You're safe. I'm here. They stayed like that for long minutes, the kitchen silent except for Astrid's crying and the distant sound of waves against the shore. Eric felt something in his chest crack open, some frozen place that had been sealed shut for 10 years. An emotion flooded through, grief for what they'd lost, rage at what had been done to her, and underneath it all, a love so fierce it terrified him. When Astrid finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and wet, but something in her eyes had softened. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now," Eric said, wiping tears from her cheeks with gentle thumbs. "I cancel a wedding. I deal with my mother's fury and Sophia's hurt. I face the scandal." He smiled, sad but certain. "And then, if you'll let me, I spend every day proving to you that you're safe. That you're loved. That you're home." "Your mother will destroy me," Astrid said. "You know she will. She'll tell everyone I'm unstable, that I'm after your money, that I'm—" "Let her try." Eric's voice was steel. "I'm done letting my mother control my life. I'm done being dutiful and dead inside. You came back, Astrid. Against impossible odds. You survived and you came back to me. I'm not losing you again." Astrid searched his face, looking for doubt or deception or the impossibility of his promise. Whatever she found there made fresh tears spill down her cheeks, but this time, she was smiling. "Minute eviga," she whispered, the words from their wedding vows. "My eternal," Eric answered, and kissed her forehead with a gentleness that acknowledged all the ways she'd been broken, all the ways she was still healing. Outside, the October sky was beginning to clear, sunlight breaking through the clouds in golden shafts that turned the Baltic Sea silver. Eric helped Astrid to her feet, and they stood together at the window, watching the light transform the water. "There's something I need to do," Eric said. "Today. Right now." He turned to face her fully. "I need to tell Sophia the truth. Face to face. She deserves that much." Fear flickered across Astrid's face. What if she'll be hurt. Probably angry. She has every right to be. Eric squeezed Astrid's hands. "But I can't marry her, and she needs to know why before the wedding day. Will you be okay here? Alone?" Astrid glanced around the kitchen, the house they'd once shared summers in. "I'll be okay. I've survived worse than being alone." She tried for a smile. "Go. Do what you need to do. I'll be here when you get back. Promise." "I promise. No more disappearing." Eric kissed her once more, softly, carefully, like she was made of glass, and then forced himself to leave before his resolve weakened. As he drove back toward Stockholm, his phone exploded with messages. His mother, Sophia, the wedding planner, business associates who'd heard rumors of trouble. He ignored them all. There was only one conversation that mattered now, and he needed to have it before his courage failed. Sophia Bergström deserved the truth. And after that, the real battle would begin. Sophia Bergström lived in an apartment in Östermalm that could have been featured in Elle decoration, all clean lines, neutral tones, and carefully curated art that whispered wealth without shouting it. Eric had been here dozens of times, had shared dinners at her marble dining table, had kissed her goodnight at her door with the kind of restrained affection that had defined their entire relationship. He'd never once felt at home here. Sophia answered on the second knock, her smile bright and welcoming until she saw his face. Then something in her expression shifted, awareness creeping in around her eyes. "Eric," she said, stepping back to let him in. "I've been calling. Are you all right? You look. We need to talk." For words, but they carried the weight of endings. Sophia's hand tightened on the door frame, her knuckles going white. She was beautiful, everyone said so, with a kind of classic Scandinavian features that photographed well, blonde hair in a perfect bob, blue eyes, high cheekbones. She wore yoga pants and a cashmere sweater, casual Friday morning attire, but somehow still looked ready for a magazine spread. "Let me make coffee," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Then we can." "Sophia, I can't marry you." The words came out abrupt, graceless, but Eric couldn't make himself soften them. He'd rehearsed gentler versions during the drive, but standing in her pristine apartment, looking at her carefully composed face, he knew there was no kind way to destroy someone's future. Sophia went very still. "I see," she said quietly. Then, after a long moment, "Is this about the woman?" Eric's head snapped up. "You know. Your mother called me last night. She said there was a situation. A woman from your past making claims." Sophia moved into the living room, settled onto her white sofa with the grace of someone trying to maintain dignity in free fall. She assured me it was being handled. That you would come to your senses. Of course his mother had called. Margareta Lindstrom never left anything to chance, never failed to control the narrative. Eric felt anger flare hot in his chest, but tamped it down. This wasn't about his mother. This was about the woman sitting on the sofa, looking at him with eyes that were trying very hard not to show hurt. Her name is Astrid, Eric said, remaining standing because sitting felt like a lie. She's my wife. Your wife is dead, Sophia said, and there was an edge to her voice now, the first crack in her composure. She's been dead for 10 years. We attended the memorial together, remember? Last year, on the anniversary. You took me to the cemetery, showed me the headstone. The memory hit Eric like a fist. Yes, he'd taken Sophia to the cemetery last October, to the empty grave with Astrid's name carved in stone. It had been his mother's idea, a way to demonstrate closure, to show Sophia that he'd moved on from his tragic past. He'd stood there in the October cold, holding Sophia's hand, and felt nothing but the hollowness of performing grief for an audience. She's not dead, Eric said. She was kidnapped. Held captive for 10 years. She escaped 6 months ago. Sophia, she's alive. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and true. Sophia's face went through a series of expressions, disbelief, confusion, and then something that looked disturbingly like calculation. That's impossible, she said finally. Eric, think about what you're saying. A woman appears out of nowhere, claiming to be your dead wife, right before our wedding? Doesn't that seem convenient? Suspicious. She sounded like his mother. The realization made Eric's stomach turn. She's not claiming to be Astrid. She is Astrid. I know her, Sophia. I know her voice, her eyes, the way he stopped, realizing he was about to describe intimacies that had no place in this conversation. She's my wife. Legally, actually. Our marriage never ended. So what? Sophia stood now, her composure cracking further. She's been gone for 10 years, Eric. A decade. You mourned her. You moved on. You proposed to me. We've built something together, maybe not love, maybe not passion, but something real. Something stable. And now you're going to throw that away for a woman who abandoned you. She didn't abandon me. She was taken. So she says. Sophia's voice rose, proper restraint giving way to raw emotion. But you don't know that. You don't know anything except that some woman showed up with a convenient story and suddenly you're ready to destroy our lives. I'm not trying to destroy anything, Eric said quietly. But I can't marry you, Sophia. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. Fair? Sophia laughed, bitter and sharp. You're talking about fairness? Eric, I've spent 2 years waiting for you to love me. 2 years being patient while you kept me at arm's length. 2 years of your mother assuring me that you just needed time, that eventually you'd open up, that the wedding would change things. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears now. I knew, you know. I always knew you didn't love me. But I thought maybe love could grow. That maybe companionship and mutual respect would be enough. The confession hit Eric harder than anger would have. He'd thought he was being kind by agreeing to the marriage, by giving Sophia the stability she wanted, the partnership his mother insisted they both needed. But he'd been lying to her from the beginning, lying by omission, by letting her hope for something he couldn't give. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Sophia, I'm so sorry. You deserve better than this. Better than me. You deserve someone who looks at you the way he stopped, unable to finish. The way I look at Astrid. The way you look at a ghost, Sophia said softly. She moved to the window, her back to him, shoulders rigid with the effort of maintaining composure. Do you know what your mother said to me last night? She said that if you tried to cancel the wedding, I should remind you of what's at stake. The merger between our families. The business implications. The social scandal. I don't care about the merger. You should. Sophia turned, and her face was dry now, businesslike. The vulnerability had been tucked away, replaced with the cool calculation of someone raised in Stockholm's upper echelons. The Bergström family has already invested heavily in combined ventures with Lindström Industries. If you humiliate me, humiliate us, by cancelling the wedding at the last minute, my father will withdraw everything. The losses will be substantial. Then let them be substantial, Eric said, his voice hard. I won't marry you for a business deal, Sophia. You deserve better than that. She studied him for a long moment, and something like respect flickered across her face. You really love her, she said finally. This Astrid. After everything. You really love her. Yes. Sophia nodded slowly, then moved to the door and opened it, a clear dismissal. Then go to her. But Eric? When this falls apart, when your mother makes her life hell, when the reality of what she's been through becomes too much, when you realize that 10 years is too much time to recover, don't come back to me. I won't be waiting. Eric moved toward the door, paused beside her. I hope you find someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved, he said quietly. I'm sorry I wasn't that person. So am I, Sophia said, and closed the door between them. The wedding planner's office was chaos. Inga Holmström, Stockholm's most sought-after event coordinator, sat behind her desk surrounded by fabric swatches, flower samples, and seating charts, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled for the first time in Eric's memory. You cannot cancel a wedding with 48 hours' notice, she said, her voice strained with a kind of panic that came from a reputation being destroyed in real time. Do you understand the logistics? The guests? The venue? The deposits? I'll pay for everything, Eric said. Every deposit, every cancellation fee, every expense. I'll compensate you personally for the damage to your reputation. But the wedding is cancelled. Your mother will. My mother doesn't make this decision. I do. Eric stood, done with this conversation. Send me the invoices. All of them. I'll handle it. He left Inga frantically making calls, her voice rising in distress as she began the impossible task of planning a wedding that Stockholm's elite had been anticipating for months. The calls began within an hour. First, business associates who'd heard rumors. Then family friends expressing concern. Then the media, gossip columnists who smelled scandal like sharks smell blood. Eric ignored them all, driving through Stockholm's afternoon traffic toward the one confrontation he'd been dreading most. His mother's estate in Djursholm was a monument to old money and older values, a sprawling property behind gates, manicured gardens despite the October chill, a house that had belonged to the Lindström family for 3 generations. Eric had grown up here, had learned here that emotions were weaknesses and love was a luxury only the foolish could afford. He'd hated it for years. Margarita was in her conservatory when Eric found her, sitting among her orchids with a tablet in hand, probably already strategizing damage control. She didn't look up when he entered. You told Sophia, she said. You cancelled the wedding. Social media is already speculating. 3 different columnists have called me for comment. Then comment on this, Eric said. Astrid is my wife. She's alive. And I choose her. Margarita set down her tablet with deliberate care. You're choosing poverty over wealth, scandal over respectability, chaos over stability. I raised you better than this. No, Eric said quietly. You raised me to prioritize reputation over humanity. Money over love. Control over authenticity. But Astrid taught me something different. She taught me what it feels like to be truly alive. And where is she now? Margarita's voice was cold, clinical. This woman who taught you so much. What has she been doing for 10 years while you built an empire? Where was she while you suffered? She was suffering too. Eric's hands clenched into fists. She was held captive, tortured, isolated. And she survived, and she came back, and you knew, and you said nothing. Because I was protecting you. For the first time, emotion cracked through Margarita's composure. She stood, and Eric saw something raw in her face. Fear, perhaps, or the closest thing to it his mother was capable of feeling. Eric, you don't understand what you're risking. This woman, this Astrid, she's damaged. Traumatized. She will drag you down with her broken pieces. She will destroy everything you've built. She is everything I've built, Eric said, his voice breaking. Every success, every achievement, every moment of the last 10 years was just me trying to survive without her. I've been half alive, more walking through my life like a ghost. And now she's back, and for the first time in a decade, I feel real. Margarita's face hardened. Then you're a fool. And when this falls apart, when she proves too damaged to function in your world, when the reality of what she's endured destroys your relationship, when you're left with nothing but scandal and financial ruin, don't come to me for help. I won't need your help, Eric said. I have everything I need. He turned to leave, but his mother's voice stopped him at the door. Your father would be ashamed. Eric looked back, and for the first time in his life, he smiled at his mother's manipulation. My father married you for love, more. He told me once, before he died, that you were the great passion of his life. That every business success meant nothing compared to having you. He paused. You've spent so long protecting the empire that you forgot what he built it for in the first place. Not for money. For family. For love. Margarita's face went pale, and Eric saw he'd struck a nerve he hadn't known existed. But he didn't wait for her response. He walked out of the conservatory, through the house he'd grown up in, past the portraits of stern Lindstrom ancestors who'd probably all prioritized duty over desire. He didn't look back. As Eric drove away from his mother's estate, leaving behind generations of expectation and control, he wondered, is freedom always this terrifying? When you finally choose love over duty, does the fear of making the wrong choice ever fully disappear, or do you just learn to trust your heart more than your doubts? The sun was setting by the time Eric returned to Dalaro, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that turned the Baltic Sea into liquid fire. The summer house glowed warm in the gathering dusk, lights on in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. Astrid had lit a fire. Eric found her in the living room, curled up on the sofa with a blanket, watching the flames. She looked up when he entered, her face anxious, hopeful, afraid. I cancelled the wedding, Eric said simply. Told Sophia the truth. Confronted my mother. It's done. Astrid's hand flew to her mouth. Eric, your business, the merger. I don't care. He crossed to the sofa, sat beside her, took her hands in his. Astrid, I spent 10 years building an empire that meant nothing because you weren't in it. I'm not making that mistake again. Your mother will never accept me, Astrid whispered. She'll make our lives hell. You know she will. Then we'll face hell together. Eric cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. Minute Allskling, I'm not asking you to fight my mother or navigate Stockholm society or be anything other than exactly who you are. I'm just asking you to stay. To let me love you. To let me spend the rest of my life making up for the 10 years we lost. Tears spilled down Astrid's cheeks, but she was smiling. You can't make up for lost time. It's gone. Then we'll make new time. Eric leaned his forehead against hers, breathing in the scent of jasmine perfume and would smoke and home. We'll start over. Here, in this house, or somewhere else if you prefer. Anywhere you want. We'll travel like you always wanted, take photos, see the world, live the life you dreamed of before everything was taken from you. What about your company? Your responsibilities? I'll delegate. Hire better people. Actually, live instead of just working. Eric pulled back enough to look into her eyes. Astrid, you were kidnapped and tortured for a decade, and you still found the courage to come back. To fight for us. I'm done being a coward. I'm done choosing duty over the only person who's ever made me feel alive. I'm broken, Astrid said, her voice small. I have nightmares. Panic attacks. There are days I can barely leave the house. Days I can't bear to be touched. Eric, I'm not the woman you married. I'm not whole anymore. Neither am I, Eric said fiercely. I've been broken for 10 years. But maybe we can be broken together. Maybe that's enough. Astrid searched his face, looking for doubt or pity or anything that would make her pull away. Whatever she found there made her smile, tentative, fragile, but real. Miniteviga, she whispered. My eternal, Eric confirmed, and kissed her. It wasn't like their kisses from before. Those had been passionate, carefree, full of youth and certainty. This kiss was slower, weighted with years and trauma and hard-won hope. It tasted like salt from tears and smoke from the fire and the bittersweet understanding that some things, once broken, would never be perfectly whole again. But it was theirs. And it was enough. Outside, the October night settled over Dalaro, and inside the summer house, two people who'd survived impossible separations held each other beside the fire and remembered what it felt like to choose love, even when love was terrifying. Especially when love was terrifying. The wedding that was supposed to happen in 2 days would not take place. Instead, scandal would ripple through Stockholm's elite circles. Business deals would collapse. Margareta Lindstrom would wage a quiet war against her son's choice. Sophia Bergström would eventually marry a banker from Geneva and be genuinely happy. But Eric and Astrid, broken and healing and impossibly together, would wake up the next morning in the summer house where they'd once been happy, and they would begin the slow work of building a new life from the fragments of their old one. And that, despite everything, would be its own kind of victory. 3 months later, January. Winter had locked Stockholm in its crystalline grip, turning the city into something from a fairy tale, all white snow and grey sky and lights that twinkled warm against the cold. Eric stood at the window of their new apartment in Södermalm, watching snowflakes drift past like falling stars, and felt something he hadn't experienced in over a decade: contentment. Not happiness. Not yet. Not completely. Healing didn't work that way. But contentment. The quiet knowledge that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Behind him, he heard Astrid moving through the apartment. Their apartment, not his, not the penthouse his mother had decorated with cold elegance, but a space they'd chosen together. Smaller, warmer, with exposed brick and large windows and room for Astrid's photography equipment. She'd started shooting again, tentatively at first, just objects around the apartment. Then the view from their window. Then, last week, she'd ventured out to Djurgården with her camera and come back with shots of winter trees that made Eric's chest ache with their beauty. She was healing. Slowly, painfully, with setbacks and breakthroughs in equal measure. But healing. Calf. Astrid called from the kitchen, and Eric turned to see her in the doorway, wearing one of his old sweaters and wool socks, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked better than she had 3 months ago. The hollows in her cheeks had filled out slightly. The constant fear in her eyes had dimmed to occasional wariness. She'd gained weight. Started smiling more easily. Last night, she'd laughed at something on television, and the sound had been so unexpected, so purely joyful, that Eric had nearly wept. "J.A. tack," he said, crossing to take the mug she offered. Their fingers brushed, and she didn't flinch. Progress, considering that for the first month, unexpected touch had sent her into panic spirals that took hours to calm. They settled on the couch together, a careful foot of space between them, another negotiation, another boundary Astrid had needed to establish. Eric had learned patience in ways he'd never imagined, had learned that love sometimes meant not touching when he desperately wanted to, meant sitting quietly through nightmares without trying to fix them, meant accepting that healing wasn't linear and some days she'd wake up terrified of her own shadow. He'd also learned that he'd do it all again without hesitation. "My therapist thinks I'm ready," Astrid said quietly, cradling her mug in both hands. "To go public. To tell the story properly." Eric's heart stuttered. They'd kept Astrid's return mostly quiet for the past 3 months. Close friends knew, necessary business associates, but they'd avoided the media circus that had briefly erupted when Eric cancelled his wedding to Sophia. His mother had spun it as personal differences and mutual decision, protecting the family reputation even as she'd cut Eric from most business dealings. He'd expected that. What he hadn't expected was how little it bothered him. "Are you sure?" he asked. "The media will be invasive. Cruel. Probably. They'll want details you shouldn't have to give." "I know." Astrid set down her mug, turned to face him fully. "But Dr. Eriksson thinks it might help. Other victims, other people who've been taken. If I can show them that survival is possible, that life after trauma is possible." She trailed off, then found her courage again. "And I'm tired of hiding. Tired of letting shame and fear control my story. What happened to me was evil, but I survived it. That's not something to hide." Eric felt pride surge through him, fierce and overwhelming. "Okay," he said. "Okay. We'll do it together. Whatever you need." "There's more," Astrid said, and something in her voice made Eric go still. "The police, the cold case unit, they want to reopen the investigation. Dr. Eriksson helped me recover some memories, details about where I was held, things I overheard. They think they might be able to identify the traffickers. Maybe stop them from," her voice broke, "from taking anyone else." "Astrid." Eric set down his own mug, turned fully toward her. "That means interviews. Depositions. Possibly testifying if they catch anyone. Are you ready for that?" "No," she said honestly. "I'm terrified. But I'm also angry, Eric. So angry. Not just for what they did to me, but for what they stole from us. 10 years. 10 years of our life together. Gone. Our 20s. The chance to have children, maybe. All the moments we should have had. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. I can't get that time back. But maybe I can stop them from stealing anyone else's future. Eric reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and Astrid leaned into his touch as he cupped her face. You're the bravest person I've ever known, he said quietly. And I'll be with you through all of it. Every interview, every deposition, every moment you need support. You're not alone anymore. Promise, she whispered. Minute eviga, he said. My eternal. That's still true. It will always be true. Astrid closed the distance between them and kissed him, soft, careful, but real. They'd been rebuilding physical intimacy slowly, learning each other again, navigating Astrid's trauma responses and Eric's fear of hurting her. Some nights she couldn't bear to be touched. Other nights she'd curl into his arms and sleep peacefully for hours. They'd learned to communicate, to ask instead of assume, to respect boundaries while slowly, tentatively, reclaiming the physical connection they'd once had. It was complicated and messy and nothing like the passionate certainty of their first marriage. It was also more real than anything Eric had felt in his entire life. 2 weeks later. The interview aired on SVT's main evening news program, a carefully planned 30-minute segment that Astrid had rehearsed with Dr. Eriksson a dozen times. Eric watched from the green room, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles ached, as his wife sat across from journalist Anna Lindqvist and told her story to millions of Swedish viewers. She was incredible. Calm, articulate, raw when she needed to be but never sensational. She talked about the kidnapping, the years of captivity, the escape. She talked about trauma and recovery and the importance of support systems. She carefully avoided details that might traumatize other survivors, but shared enough to make the horror real, undeniable. And when Anna Lindqvist asked about Eric, about coming back to find him engaged to another woman, Astrid smiled. I was terrified, she said honestly. 10 years is a long time. I thought he'd moved on, that I'd lost my chance. But Eric. Her voice softened. Eric chose love over duty, over reputation and money and everything his world told him mattered. He chose us. And that's why I'm able to sit here today, healing instead of hiding. Because he reminded me that I was worth choosing. In the green room, Eric pressed his hands to his face and wept. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, social media exploded with support. Survivors of trafficking contacted Astrid's lawyer, offering solidarity and shared stories. The cold case unit was flooded with tips. 3 other women came forward with similar experiences, different captors, but the same professional methodology, suggesting a larger trafficking ring. There was backlash too, of course. Trolls who questioned Astrid's story. Gossip columnists who speculated about money grabs and fabricated trauma. A particularly vicious editorial suggested she was mentally unstable and Eric was being manipulated. Margareta Lindström declined to comment publicly, but Eric knew his mother well enough to recognize her fingerprints on some of the more calculated media attacks. He'd expected it. What he hadn't expected was how little it touched them. Astrid had stopped reading comments after the first day, focusing instead on messages from other survivors, on coordinating with the police investigation, on her therapy and photography and the slow work of rebuilding her life. Eric had redirected his business priorities, stepping back from Lindström Industries' leadership to focus on consulting work that allowed him flexible hours and the ability to be present when Astrid needed him. They lived smaller, quieter, but infinitely richer. April, 6 months after Astrid's return. Spring came to Stockholm like a promise being kept, ice breaking on the harbour, crocuses pushing through snow, daylight stretching longer each evening. Eric and Astrid walked through Djurgården on a Sunday afternoon, hand in hand, Astrid's camera hanging from her neck. She stopped periodically to photograph things. Cherry blossoms beginning to bloom, children feeding ducks at the canal, an elderly couple sitting on a bench sharing a thermos of coffee. Eric watched her work, saw the way she'd lost herself in the viewfinder, the way her whole body relaxed when she was creating. I've been thinking, Astrid said, lowering her camera. About something Dr. Eriksson asked me. What's that? She asked what I wanted my life to look like. Not what I thought I should want, or what would make other people happy. What I actually wanted. Astrid turned to face him, afternoon sunlight catching in her hair. And I realized. I want to travel again. Not far, not yet. But maybe to the archipelago this summer. Maybe to Norway in the fall. I want to take photos. I want to remember what it feels like to choose where I go. Eric saw the future unfold in her eyes, not the perfect life they'd once dreamed of, but something real and hard won and theirs. If you could rebuild your life from the ground up, would you recreate what was lost, or would you have the courage to build something entirely new? Then that's what we'll do, Eric said simply. We'll travel. We'll take photos. We'll build whatever life you want to build. Not just my life, Astrid corrected gently. Ours. What do you want, Eric? You've spent 6 months taking care of me, but what do you want? Eric considered this, looking out over the water where sailboats were beginning to emerge from winter storage. I want mornings where I wake up and you're still there, he said quietly. I want to watch you create. I want to grow old with you. He paused, vulnerable in ways he'd never been before his carefully constructed life had fallen apart. I want to finally understand what my father meant when he said love was the only thing that mattered. Astrid's eyes shimmered with tears, but she was smiling. I think we're going to be okay, she said. Not perfect. Not unmarked by what happened. But okay. Together. Together, Eric agreed, and kissed her there in Durgaden with spring blooming around them and the future uncertain but possible. 2 months later, June. The small church in Dalaro could seat maybe 50 people. Eric and Astrid had invited 20. No elaborate arrangements, no society columnists, no four-course dinners or string quartets. Just close friends, Astrid's parents, who'd wept for an hour straight when she'd first reunited with them, and a handful of Eric's business associates who'd stayed loyal when the scandal hit. Margareta Lindstrom had received an invitation. She hadn't responded. Eric had made peace with it. His mother would either come to accept his choice eventually, or she wouldn't. He'd learned that he couldn't control other people's reactions, only his own choices. And he chose Astrid. Every day, in 100 small ways, he chose her. Astrid stood at the back of the church in a simple dress, cream-colored linen, knee-length, nothing like the elaborate gown she'd worn at their first wedding. Her hair was loose, threaded with wildflowers. She looked nervous and beautiful and real. Ready? Her father asked, offering his arm. Yes, Astrid said, smiling. I'm ready. The ceremony was simple. No grand vows about perfection or forever after. Instead, Eric and Astrid stood before the parish priest and spoke truths they'd learned through loss and return. I promise to choose you, Eric said, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. I promise to hold space for your healing and to be honest about my own. I promise that you are enough, exactly as you are, with all your scars and fears and strength. Minute Heviger. Astrid's voice was steady when she replied, I promise to trust you with my broken pieces. I promise to fight for us, even when trauma tells me to run. I promise to build a life that's ours, not what we lost, but something new. Something real. Minute Heviger. They exchanged rings, not the originals, which had been lost to time, but new ones they designed together. Simple bands of Swedish gold, inscribed with coordinates, the exact location of the Dalaro summer house where they'd first said I love you 15 years ago. When the priest pronounced them married, again, anew, for real this time, the small congregation erupted in applause and tears. Eric kissed his wife, and she kissed him back, and for the first time in over 10 years, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than endure. 1 year after Astrid's return, October. The photography exhibition opened at a small gallery in Gamla Stan on a crisp autumn evening. Eric stood beside Astrid as people filed in, studying her work, a collection titled After. The photos documented her journey, not the trauma itself, but the healing after. Images of the Dalaro summer house in different seasons. Stockholm streets at dawn. Her hands holding Eric's. Shadows and light. Fear and hope. The visual story of what came after the darkness. One photo in particular drew crowds, a self-portrait of Astrid standing at the edge of the Baltic, her back to the camera, looking out toward the horizon. The caption read simply, moving forward means carrying the past, not erasing it. It's extraordinary, someone said, and Eric turned to find his mother standing beside him. Margareta Lindstrom looked older than she had a year ago. New lines around her eyes, silver hair completely white now instead of carefully colored. She wore her usual armor of expensive clothes and perfect posture, but something in her expression was softer than Eric remembered. More, he said, surprised. You came. I was invited, Margareta said stiffly. Then, after a pause, I wanted to see her work. To understand what you've been. She trailed off, gestured vaguely at the photos. To understand. They stood in silence, looking at Astrid's images. Finally, Margarita spoke again, her voice carefully controlled. She's talented. Very talented. Yes, Eric said. She is. And you're happy. It wasn't quite a question. Yes, Eric repeated. I'm happy. For the first time in over a decade, I'm actually living instead of just existing. Margarita's jaw tightened, and Eric braced for criticism. Instead, his mother said quietly, your father used to say something similar. That before he met me, he was just going through motions. That I made him feel alive. She looked at Eric then, and he saw something unexpected in her eyes, regret. I'd forgotten that. I spent so long protecting what we built that I forgot why he built it in the first place. More. I won't apologize for trying to protect you, Margarita interrupted. That's not who I am. But I will admit that perhaps. She paused, choosing words carefully. Perhaps I was wrong about Astrid. About what you needed. She glanced across the gallery to where Astrid was talking with visitors, animated and alive. She makes you happy. That should have been enough for me. It wasn't a full reconciliation. Margarita Lindstrom didn't do full reconciliations. But it was a start, a crack in the armor, a tentative olive branch. Would you like to meet her? Eric asked. Properly, I mean. Not as adversaries. Margarita looked genuinely nervous for the first time in Eric's memory. I wouldn't know what to say. Start with hello, Eric suggested gently. The rest will follow. He watched his mother cross the gallery toward Astrid, watched the moment of tension when Astrid recognized who was approaching, watched them shake hands and begin to talk. It was stiff, awkward, laden with history and hurt. But it was something. And sometimes, something was enough. 2 years after Astrid's return. The summer house in Delaro had been renovated, not erased of memories, but updated, made lighter and warmer. New windows let in more sun. The kitchen had been expanded. Astrid's photography studio took up the entire second floor. Eric sat on the dock, feet dangling in the Baltic summer-warm water, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Behind him, he heard the screen door open and close, heard Astrid's footsteps on the wooden planks. She settled beside him, handed him a glass of wine, leaned her head on his shoulder. Good day, he asked. Very good. Sold 3 prints from the exhibition. And the trafficking investigation made another arrest. They think they've identified the ringleader. Astrid's voice held satisfaction and sadness in equal measure. 4 more women have been recovered. Alive. Eric pressed a kiss to her hair. Because of you. Because you were brave enough to speak up. Because I had you to come back to, Astrid corrected. I wouldn't have survived any of it without knowing you were out there. Waiting. Still loving me even when I was impossible to love. You were never impossible to love, Eric said fiercely. Difficult sometimes. Yes. Complicated. But never impossible. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Around them, the summer evening buzzed with life, birds calling, water lapping against the dock, the distant sound of a neighbor's laughter carrying across the water. I've been thinking, Astrid said slowly, about the future, about what we want. And I think. She pulled back to look at him, and Eric saw hope and fear and courage in her expression. I think I might be ready. To try. For a family. Eric's heart stopped, restarted, began racing. They talked about children occasionally, carefully, hypothetically, always with the understanding that Astrid needed time to heal before taking on the demands of parenthood. He'd never pushed, never suggested, never wanted her to feel pressured. Are you sure? He asked. There's no rush, Astrid. We have time. We've already lost so much time, she said softly. I don't want to lose more waiting for perfect readiness that might never come. I'm not healed completely, I don't know if I ever will be. But I'm stable. I have support systems. And I want to build something beautiful with you. Something those men couldn't steal from us. Eric cupped her face in his hands, overwhelmed. If this is what you want, truly want, then yes. God, yes. Astrid smiled, And it was the smile he remembered from 15 years ago, young and hopeful and unbroken. Not because the trauma had disappeared, but because she'd learned to carry it without letting it define her completely. Min eviga, she whispered. My eternal, Eric replied, and kissed her as the Stockholm sun set over the Baltic, painting their world in gold. Epilogue. 5 years after Astrid's return. The little girl had Eric's blue eyes and Astrid's blonde hair, and at 3 years old, she ruled the summer house with the benevolent tyranny only toddlers could manage. Her name was Lova, Promise, and she was currently very seriously explaining to Eric why seagulls needed to be invited to her birthday party. Because they sing, Lova insisted, her Swedish vowels still slightly muddled by toddler pronunciation. And everybody who sings gets cake. That's a very good rule, Eric said solemnly, crouching to her level. But seagulls might eat all the cake before the other guests arrive. Lova considered this, then nodded sagely. Okay. They can come after. For leftovers. Compromise, Astrid said from behind her camera, capturing the moment. She definitely got your negotiation skills. And your stubbornness, Eric replied, standing and sweeping Lova into his arms. She shrieked with laughter, throwing her arms around his neck. It hadn't been easy. Pregnancy had brought up unexpected trauma responses, and the first year of Lova's life had been challenging as Astrid navigated new motherhood while still healing from old wounds. There had been therapy sessions and panic attacks and nights when Astrid was convinced she was failing. But there had also been joy, pure, uncomplicated joy. Lova's first smile. Her first word, which had been Papa, much to Eric's delight and Astrid's mock indignation. The way she'd reached for both of them with complete trust, never doubting she was loved and safe. They'd given her something neither of them had fully had, a childhood built on security and love instead of duty and expectation. Margarita visited once a month now, still formal, still controlled, but warming gradually to her granddaughter. Last visit, Eric had found her on the floor playing blocks with Lova, and the sight had nearly brought him to tears. Some wounds healed. Others scarred. But either way, life continued. Papa, Lova said seriously, patting Eric's cheeks with small hands. Why does Mama take so many pictures? Eric glanced at Astrid, who'd lowered her camera and was watching them with eyes full of love. Because, he said, Mama teaches us that the best way to hold on to happiness is to capture it. To remember it. So even on hard days, we can look back and see proof that good things are real. Oh, Lova said, processing this. Then, can I have a cookie? Astrid laughed. The sound still made Eric's heart skip after all these years, and set down her camera. Yes, but only one before dinner. They moved inside as the summer evening settled into twilight, the three of them together in the house that had witnessed so much loss and healing. On the wall hung Astrid's photos, their second wedding, Lova's birth, family dinners, ordinary moments made extraordinary by the simple fact of their existence. Later, after Lova was asleep and the dishes were done, Eric and Astrid stood on the dock again. The same dock where they'd had 1,000 conversations, where they'd rebuilt their life piece by careful piece. Do you ever think about it? Astrid asked quietly. The 10 years. What we lost. Sometimes, Eric admitted. But mostly I think about what we found. We were different people before, Astrid. Younger. Certain about things that turned out to be fragile. What we have now, it's built on survival and choice and hard work. It's real in a way our first marriage never had to be. Astrid leaned into him, and Eric wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. No regrets, she asked. Only that you suffered, Eric said fiercely. I'd erase that if I could. Take it on myself. But us? This life? No regrets. They stood together as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, two people who'd lost everything and somehow found their way back to each other. The story hadn't been perfect. There had been scandal and pain and moments when giving up seemed easier than fighting. But they'd fought anyway. And they'd won. Not the dramatic victory of fairy tales, but the quiet triumph of choosing love every single day. Of healing together. Of building something real from broken pieces. Minute eviga, Astrid whispered into the summer night. My eternal, Eric replied, and meant it with every scarred, grateful corner of his heart. Above them, the Swedish summer sky stretched endless and full of stars, 1,000 points of light in the darkness, proving that even in the deepest night, beauty and hope could still exist. And in the summer house behind them, a little girl named Promise slept peacefully, dreaming of seagulls and birthday cake and the absolute certainty that she was loved. The end was also a beginning. And that, more than anything, was the victory they'd fought for. The story shows Astrid surviving kidnapping, Eric choosing love over duty, money, reputation, confronting his controlling mother, breaking his engagement honorably, reuniting with Astrid, supporting her healing journey, remarrying, having a child, and building a beautiful life together. Complete victory and redemption for both protagonists. Thanks for watching till the end. We know you loved this story, and there are many more thrilling ones waiting for you. Just click on the video on your screen to dive into the next chapter.